and welcome to our presentation titled Transitioning Active Learning Recitations Online. My name is John Kerrigan.
My name is Sheila Tavanna.
And we are instructors in the Rutgers University Math Department. We were fortunate enough to be recipients of the Provost Grant, along with Geraldine Cochran, Matt Charnley, and Sally Mulvey, and we studied the transition of active learning classes, specifically recitations, from the in-person setting to the online setting. Our presentation today will discuss our study, including our research questions, our literature, our method, our findings, and then some takeaways for future practice. So what kind of guided our study was that we know that active learning is a good thing for students. It's been studied very widely in live settings. At Rutgers, we've been looking at active learning classroom spaces and making a lot of headway prior to COVID-19 with incorporating active learning in a variety of disciplines. When we had the emergency shift to online instruction, we needed to investigate what from the in-person setting would work once moved to a more online setting, and which tools and strategies specifically best enabled active learning from the faculty's perspective. As far as literature goes, there's no shortage of studies on the effectiveness of active learning. And when we did a little bit of a lit review, we found some seminal studies on improved students' critical thinking, improved writing, lots of literature on stronger post-test outcomes in classroom settings that employed active learning versus a traditional lecture. The Freeman et al. Meta-analysis from 2014 is an especially seminal piece in active learning and STEM disciplines. Lower course failure rates and stronger learning outcomes on post-test as well. So not even just the grade, but the amount of learning they retain and move forward with. As far as active online learning goes, what types of methods and successes and failures have instructors experienced in the online setting? Much of the research has been given to activity-based frameworks and things like role-playing, problem-based learning, and more recently, student creation. Giving students the tools and the projects to be able to create their own videos or projects or things like that. And then, of course, Flipped Classroom has been gaining steam as well. It was being implemented here at Rutgers and obviously in other places prior to COVID-19. But during that remote transition to, the transition to online teaching, a lot of instructors were looking at, how do I do this now fully online? The third body of literature we look at is STEM recitations. A lot of the research we found here was a little bit older. We found that research in STEM recitations pointed to group work and how effective that was in math, in physics, and in chemistry. And this goes back to the 90s and the early 2000s. We found one more recent study from 2014 where learning outcomes were strongest in active learning Calc 1 for STEM majors in those recitations compared to traditional recitations. So it seems that even when active learning is employed in recitation, which is traditionally conceptualized as more of a homework help QA practice kind of setting, the benefits are really good even there as well. So our research questions guiding the study, which Sheila will go into next, are what elements of recitations were retained in transition to online teaching? What elements of recitations were lost as a result of the transition to online teaching? And by both of these questions, we mean when we ask faculty what stayed and what left when you moved your in-person recitations to online recitations. That's what we wanted to investigate. And you'll see on the next couple of slides, some of those things were concretes and some weren't. And then what was most interesting to us was what were the challenges faced and lessons learned during the abrupt transition to online teaching.
In the next slides, I will be talking about the method that we utilized in our research. We prepared a Qualtrics survey of 34 questions, and 49 faculty members that included the course coordinators, lecturers, recitation instructors, some of them were full-time tenured faculty, some of them were non-tenured faculty and part-time lecturers. They responded to our surveys. And we didn't only, although we are both that faculty, we didn't only send the survey to the mathematics faculty, but through the multiple STEM departments, such as you can see in the pie chart, the distribution of the disciplines who took part in our survey was 41% was mathematics faculty, 20 faculty to be precise in terms of math teaching, and 15 faculty from physics, 10 faculty members from chemistry, and 4 faculty members from genetics. So as you can see, this wasn't only included for this mathematics faculty, but we also observed how our research questions were answered for the faculty, from the faculty perspective, for STEM faculty members from multiple disciplines. As John mentioned, in the terms of the recitation specifically. So questions address various components that involved how was the shift to online recitation, especially the abrupt shift mid-spring 2020, March 2020. And it included collaborations, accommodations, and assessments. After we sent the survey, we sent a few reminders to the faculty members. And once we closed the survey, we exported the data and we cleaned it and analyzed it using a semi-open coding scheme. We also asked faculty members, in addition to completing our survey, if they are willing to allocate an hour, roughly an hour of their time for a follow-up interview. 10 faculty members agreed to participate in a follow-up interview. And the interviewed faculty were from the 3 disciplines: mathematics, genetics, and chemistry. The Qualtrics survey, the interview protocol, and the interview guide were devised and revised by us, the research team. As John mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, this study were approved by an IRB board, Institution Review Board, before we used by the research team. And this is the IRB protocol number. Let's talk about some of the findings that we had based on the interview, based on the survey. Respondents to the survey mentioned that in most cases, unfortunately, the tangible elements of active learning recitations were transitioned to the online environment, including collaborative group work. So, as we mentioned, especially during the abrupt change to online learning, there was a shift that, the collaboration in the classrooms through the workshops and the recitations, we had to find means to implement the same activities in an online setting. And it was an abrupt change. I remember I spent my spring break during spring 2020 on finding ways and the devices that we need to perform our recitations. Although the tangible elements of the learning recitations were able to be transitioned to the online environment, some things proven to be challenging, such as the whole class discussion and the assessments. And the faculty like us, we had to go through additional accommodations to accommodate our students' needs. So let's talk about the collaborative group work and whole class discussion. 36 of the respondents retained the collaborative work in the online setting, while 9 of them mentioned that they removed this component. The rationale of removing the collaborative work component from the recitations, the instructors mentioned that there is a lack of engagement, unfortunately, in the online form of collaborative work, and that is the reason why they eliminated this from the recitations. Out of 36, 9 respondents removed, but the other 27 respondents, they retained the collaborative work. And they said that most of us, we used breakout rooms via Zoom, and we found an adjustment, such as incorporating a grade, such as a participation grade, or having students submit something electronically, such as an individually submitted worksheets, to be able to encourage and also enforce in a way their online collaborations. And these are the things that were important to improve and retain or come up with in order to improve student engagement. And if we can continue to talk about the findings in terms of the whole class discussion and collaborative group work, there were, of course, some challenges in any transition, just like transition to online stations. Challenges included lack of participation, students not turning on the camera or hesitant to participate in the chat, and especially these brought additional challenges in terms of students actively engaging in the learning activities, monitoring students' work, especially to be able to provide feedback, was a challenge in the virtual environment. These tangible aspects were lost during the transition to online stations, such as this relationship building, the human interactions, not only between the students, but between the student and the instructor. These, of course, became more difficult in an online setting. And I would say now, after 2 years, the majority of us have had an experience teaching more online-oriented recitations. Now we are getting used to it. We are finding different ways to do it. But especially if you remember, beginning of the rapid shift to online recitations, that was a challenge back then. And some things that are lost or became difficult were coaching students when it wasn't possible to see their work or their body language. Instructors also mentioned the loss of the ability to real-time proctor students during various forms of assessments, such as midterms or quizzes, and how this required a different approach to assessment as well.
All right, so the next slides just capture the number of instructors who switched or didn't switch or remain the same or whatnot. So in terms of collaborative work, that was always one of the tenets of in-person recitation. Students often worked in a small group to tackle some more difficult problems, or in the science classes, it might have been more scenario-based. And what we found was that when we asked our participants, we had about 36 of them who had collaborative work in person, and then they also maintained it once we went online. That's what this black bar here means. And then the gray part of it, those are instructors who had it in person, but then when they went online, they abandoned it. So that was roughly 9 people or so that did that. And then there were a smaller number of instructors who never had collaborative work. I think one person had none in person, but then switched to it online for some reason. And then a handful of people had none both times, about 3 people. So the predominant feel was people who were doing collaborative work in person they then transitioned that online and employed breakout rooms. In terms of graded work, having students submit something at the end of recitation for a score, you'll see this dark black here. That happened in both settings. About 36 people graded work in person and continue to do that online. Some additional accommodations, as Sheila mentioned, were introduced, such as allowing students 30 minutes beyond the end of class to submit it in case there was a technical difficulty or an issue with scanning or uploading or anything like that. A couple people did have graded work in person, but then when they went online, they decided not to grade work anymore. And then about 10 people didn't grade work in either setting. So they didn't do it in person, and then when they went online, they found no reason to do it there either. Some more interesting findings, the student-to-student interaction was difficult once we moved to online recitations. And reasons for that cited by faculty were reliability of internet connection. Some students had spotty Wi-Fi, or they were unable to turn their cameras on because it drained their connection or their battery. So that made the connections difficult sometimes. There were fewer opportunities for students to talk to each other online. When we're in person, students can talk to each other before class starts or during class or after class. Those are the more, spur of the moment type interactions. But once online, you don't really have that when everybody's populating into the Zoom room. It's not as natural to turn to a student and ask a question about the book or the homework or an assignment or anything like that. So that was something that faculty mentioned as a concern about online. And then the spaces, the natural collaborative spaces in an active learning classroom that we've been so fortunate to have were lost when we went online. And faculty felt that it was a challenge for students to keep their cameras on or their audio on, and that they used the chat functions here and there, but could have used it a little bit more. Some faculty and teaching assistants overseeing recitations tried some new ways to encourage student participation based on what they were observing. So one faculty member in particular, whose voice we'll highlight, said the biggest challenge was getting students to interact and making sure everybody interacted instead of the same students answering questions all the time. This person had one TA who managed as well because she had a spreadsheet and recorded who spoke and what they did to make sure everybody was participating. So, maybe some people had this in person, they have like a checklist or something, but it was a little bit harder online to have that open and then also run your online classroom. But it was something that at least brought more voices into the fold. Another thing that came up, students need personal communication to establish connections to make study partners during active learning recitations or form study groups. So perhaps some outreach from the instructor would help in that regard. And those personal interactions are important. And a lot of faculty felt that it just can't be substituted by Zoom or by email. The face-to-face really helped with the student-to-student interaction. Accommodations, a lot of instructors mentioned providing extra accommodations beyond what is legally required for students who would need them. About 40 instructors said that they allowed extra leniencies and accommodations for students to participate and attend recitation sessions. And we know our usual adjustments and accommodations as far as extra time is concerned on assessments. But a lot of instructors also did deadline extensions, allowing students to participate in other ways. If they were uncomfortable using video or audio, they allowed them to use the chat box. And just recording their lessons, this was something that not all of us did before, but once we moved online, a lot of faculty members mentioned recording the lectures so students could access them at a later time. And this was done with a focus on equity. A couple faculty members mentioned that they wanted to make the learning environment very equitable and eliminate any issues of environmental inequity by offering their recorded sessions. And then, of course, there was the issue of students who were in different countries and different time zones and had issues with VPNs and exams at weird hours, during times when we normally sleep. So a lot of faculty members accommodated those students as well by other means to make sure that they were able to take their assessments and do their assignments at a time that was good for them to demonstrate their mastery. Here's just an example. We listed out once we surveyed and interviewed all the faculty members, the things that they did for the students in terms of accommodations, and a lot of it had to do with accessing materials, providing accommodations to live proctored assessments, having students make sure they can study in a quiet place, and especially a lot of students who we had during that remote semester or two, a lot of them picked up extra work. And as a result, they found it challenging to keep on top of their schoolwork because they were working for whatever reason. They were home instead of on campus, or they had a family to support. So some additional accommodations were made for those students who picked up additional work during the time they were full-time students. Some other things that came up: LA and TA training. In case you're unfamiliar, an LA is a learning assistant. This is an undergraduate student who is trained in pedagogy and collaboration and works in the recitation with the instructor to support students in their learning. And they were very, very helpful in the online space, with study groups and going in and out of breakout rooms and being an extra set of hands for the instructors. One comment that did come out of our interviews and our surveys was that because the online setting, made communication difficult for, between students and then between the student and the instructor, some of the specialized scientific content might have been a little bit difficult to articulate in the online space. So one recommendation that faculty suggested was perhaps some more content training for LAs to be able to work with students in the online setting so that they can encourage their students to see things from different perspectives and also to think metacognitively. But, all the faculty members agreed that having these students was a godsend, and that they were very, very helpful in keeping the class flow going and managing the breakout rooms when students were engaging in collaborative work. Some positives that came out, since we just talked about some of the issues we faced, a lot of instructors commented on clearer notes that can be reused in subsequent semesters. A lot of instructors discussed using Google Jamboard or some type of online whiteboard as a note skeleton, and then being able to go back and erase it and reuse it in the future, which was a great thing. And of course, build on it too, as they find additional resources. Online office hours were great. They were flexible and convenient for both students and the instructor, instead of having to find an empty office space or, I know for myself, scheduling a common time on campus can be difficult both for me as an instructor and for students who have competing demands on their own schedule. So the online just allowed, a greater pool of students to join who might not have joined in the past if they were commuters or had obligations during the time office hours were offered. And then also flexibility meeting with colleagues. The Zoom setting allowed for more quick meets. I can speak for myself that I met with my teaching assistants more, and it was just easier. We were able to join a meet and talk and, put our heads together for 30 minutes to an hour. Whereas when we were in person, it was hard to coordinate, 3 schedules at once and find a common time to meet on campus. All right, so to wrap things up, our summary and implications. When we look at all of the people who participated in our study, we found that only 9 of the 49 faculty we surveyed dropped active learning from the course completely. But those who did keep it found that they could utilize breakout rooms and provide class content such as worksheets through some of the Google tools like Jamboard, the virtual whiteboard, Google Slides, Google Sheets, and they were able to get their students to share their screens to engage with their group mates. The ability to facilitate an entire class was lost in the online maze, and navigating breakout rooms required TAs to keep records of dominant students, so students who were reluctant to engage would have a chance to get their questions answered. So, it just added another layer of management on the faculty's end to ensure that everybody had a voice in the class. And this was a little bit easier to do in person than it was online. Some other takeaways that we got, it was very quick, and instructors had to quickly adapt to Canvas or Zoom and make accommodations very, very quickly. So, we're so grateful that our peers were able to catch on really quick and do that for our students. And, that did come with some hiccups. There were issues on the students' end with internet access and connection. So, we again, as instructors, handle that and gave additional accommodations and flexibility so students could be successful in our courses. And, we continue to look at what we learned online as we go back to more face-to-face classes. I think this is a great opportunity for us to see what worked there to bring in the online setting during that remote semester back to more of a face-to-face setting. And that is our talk. So we would like to thank you for joining us, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your conference.